Okay, before we get started on today's message, I wanted to mention that at Alpine, we have a couple needs that we are looking to fill, and one of those, we have one male counselor position left, and we have several guiding positions left. For those of you that are outdoors, love water, love nature, all those kind of things, I would encourage you to talk to Mr. Sharp and talk to him a little bit more about what your plans are for this summer, and maybe he can encourage you to look at adventures and be a part of that. I also want to encourage those of you that would rather not deal with public, but would rather take advantage of a custodial option. I want to put a plug in for Mr. Robinson. I know he is looking for additional help, and we are always looking for great students that will come alongside and support us in our ministry here. So if you are one of those students and don't have a position or a job this summer, please check out one of those opportunities, one of those options, and we will look forward to talking to you and maybe working with you this summer. Okay? My message today is going to be, there we go, under the yoke of obedience unto death. Years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Europe. My dad, my brother, and myself, we did a 15-day World War II tour. And we went to Belgium, we went to Germany, we went to France, we went to Luxembourg, and we went to the Netherlands. And we went and we surveyed all the different places that the battles had taken place over in Europe, which was an amazing thing. And as we went over there, we went to the Netherlands, and we were able to see a lot of graves. Can we get the next slide? There we go. Okay, there we go. In the Netherlands, they had a memorial there for a lot of our fallen servicemen. Over 8,000 Americans are buried right here. And you know, as I walked through there, it just didn't hit me. It was like I'm looking at graves, but these aren't really people. Because it just didn't hit me how personal that these individuals gave of themselves, obeyed their commander to come over to Europe to save the United States from the tyranny of Nazism. And so each one of these graves represents a life. And as I was walking through there, I just happened to come upon one of them, and it was Lieutenant Colonel Cole. And he was a Medal of Honor winner, and I was just thinking, you know, this was a guy that's basically your age. They were between 18 and 21, most of the servicemen that were over there during that time. So this is your age group that was over there serving in that theater. But for this gentleman right here, he gave himself in the biggest way he could. Now, this one actually didn't give his life at this time, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about him. This is his honorary citation that was given to him for his obedience and risking his life. For gallantry and at the risk of his own life, above and beyond the call of duty, on the 11th of June, 1944, in France, Lieutenant Colonel Cole was personally leading his battalion in forcing the last 4 bridges on the road to Cardigan when his entire unit was suddenly pinned to the ground by intense and withering enemy rifle fire, machine gun fire, mortar fire, and artillery fire placed upon them, well prepared in heavily fortified positions within 150 yards of the foremost elements. After the devastating and unceasing enemy fire had for over 1 hour prevented any movement and inflicted numerous casualties, Lieutenant Colonel Cole, observing this almost hopeless situation, courageously issued the orders to assault the enemy positions with fixed bayonets. With utter disregard for his own life, and completely ignoring the enemy fire, he rose to his feet in front of his battalion with his drawn pistol, shouting to his men to follow with him in the assault. Catching up a fallen man's rifle and bayonet, he charged on and led the remnants of his battalion across the bullet-swept open ground and into the enemy position. His heroic and valiant action is so inspiring his men resulted in the complete establishment of our bridgehead across the Dove River. The cool, fearless, personal bravery and outstanding leadership displayed by Lieutenant Colonel Cole reflected a great credit upon himself and are worthy of the highest praise in military. And as I continued to walk through, another one, this is Lieutenant Colonel Cole, another one caught my attention. And this one's Private Peter. So I don't know if you can actually see this, but this next slide will give you an idea. I'll be reading it as you're looking at it there. Private Peters was a radio operator with Company G. He made a descent in Germany east of the Rhine with 10 others. He landed in a field about 75 yards from a German machine gun supported by riflemen and was immediately pinned down by heavy direct fire. The position of the small unit seemed hopeless, with men struggling to free themselves from their parachutes and a hail of bullets that cut them off from the rest of the nearby equipment bundles. When Private Peter stood up without orders and he began a one-man charge against the hostile emplacement armed with only a rifle and grenades. His single-handed assault immediately drew enemy fire away from his comrades. He had run halfway to his objective, pitting his rifle against those of a machine gun when he was struck and knocked to the ground by a burst. Once more he was torn by bullets and this time was unable to rise. With gallantry, devotion to his self-imposed mission, he crawled directly into fire and was mortally wounded, until close enough to hurl grenades that knocked out the machine gun, killing 2 operators and drove protecting riflemen from their positions in the safety of the woods. By his supreme sacrifice, Private Peters saved the lives of many of his fellow soldiers and made it possible for them to reach their equipment and organize and seize the objective. So you can see these guys, when you're in the military, and I think a number of you have been in the military, we've had a lot of Rangers come through and everything, to the degree that they are under complete obedience to give their best that they can and to accomplish the goals that are given them. In another situation, as I was walking around, this next area we're in, we're actually overlooking the beaches of Normandy. And there's a place there called Pointe du Hoc. Now, many of you older folks would probably maybe hear about this. This was a place where they had to establish a beachhead for the beaches of Normandy. And there were these huge guns that were able to fire upon the ships that were unloading all these soldiers onto the beaches that they had to knock out. Now, fortunately, a lot of those big guns had been moved inland because they knew that there was an aerial bombardment that was going to take place. But Pointe du Hoc was one of those areas that they had to scale a 100-foot wall and be able to accomplish their objective and move forward to be able to clear that area out for the incoming soldiers not to get mown down. And I remember as I was there, I was standing over this, and I was actually looking over the edge to the actual place that these guys, the next slide will show you the place where these guys were actually coming up. And to be there in person and seeing what they had to do was just amazing. This 100-foot cliff that they were scaling was just a feat in itself to be able to do that. But I think through all this, again, the thing that hit me, or the thing that really captured my attention, was that these men were willing to give of themselves, and they knew a lot of them would not make it home. A lot of them died. In fact, of the number that did, there's 225 that scaled this, and of that, only, I think 75 were left alive. So, they were willing to give the ultimate sacrifice in obedience to their country and obedience to their commander. And as I was thinking through this, one of the things in my life that I was thinking through was the next slide, and it was the 5 men from that were in Ecuador that gave of their lives for really missions to be spread across the world. These men were Jim Elliott, Nate Saint, Ed McCulley, Peter Fleming, and Roger Udarian. Now they had been trying to contact the Huaorani tribe, if I can say it correctly, and these were vicious people. They killed each other, they killed other tribesmen, and they were a very, very vicious people. So what they were doing is they were taking their plane, and they actually figured it out how they could drop gifts to these people, and these people were actually giving gifts back. So there was a contact there, and so they thought, you know what, it's about time for us to make that live contact, land our plane on the beach, and to be able to work with these people and to evangelize them. So these 5 men, knowing that this was a very vicious tribe, knowing that there was potential of loss of life, they decided we're going to go for it, and we're going to follow the Lord's command. We're going to be obedient to Him. to move forward and to evangelize this tribe. So as they landed the plane and as they were standing there, there was three people that came out to them, and they were making contact with them. And as they were making contact with them, there were other tribesmen that were hidden in the bush there. They all came out and started spearing all of the missionaries that were there. Now, the interesting thing, I didn't realize this, I didn't even know this for a long time, but those missionaries had guns. There were guns on that plane that they could have killed every one of those tribesmen and saved their own life. But they decided not to. They had made a pact with each other. They said, no matter what happens, no matter what comes up, we are going to not try to protect ourselves. And I can tell you that through that, missions they've had such a tremendous outgrowth of missions. In fact, I have it written down here. The death of the men galvanizes the missionary effort in the United States, speaking and outpouring of funding for evangelization efforts around the world. Their work is still frequently remembered in evangelistic publications, and in 2006 was the subject of the film Into the Spear, which many of you probably seen. So again, these men they obeyed the Lord, and their obedience was even unto death. And I'm kind of interested, where are we at in this whole spectrum of obedience, and what are we willing to give? I want you to take your Bibles, if you wouldn't mind, and turn to Daniel. We're going to go to the first chapter of Daniel. We're going to read several verses. Daniel is one of my favorite characters in the Bible. Just a godly example, loved the Lord, and was willing to do whatever it took to follow the Lord. Okay, if you have your place there, Daniel 1. In the 3rd year of reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the hand of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of God. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom there was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning, in knowledge and understanding, science, and as such as had the ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, and of the wine which he drank, so nourished them 3 years. And at that end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave these names. For he gave unto Daniel the name Belshazzar, Hananiah, Shadrach, and to Mishael and Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. And I don't know if you remember, I remember in Sunday school it was shake the bed, make the bed, and to bed we go. To remember those names? Anyway, okay. Verse 8, Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the princes of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your face worse lightning than the children which are of your sort? Then shall you make me endanger my head to the king. Then Daniel said to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Then let our countenance be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and that thou seest deal with thy servants. So he consented to them this matter, and proved them 10 days. So, getting back to Daniel when he was first taken. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you have been taken away from all that you've known and put into a situation that you know nothing about and had to deal with it. I can tell you that a number of years ago, we took a missions trip to Africa. And when we were in Africa, we were flying back from Cape Town to Johannesburg. We got to Johannesburg, and they told us, they said, by the way, you've missed your plane. And I thought, missed our plane? That's not a good deal. So there's one plane that flies from Atlanta, or from Johannesburg to Atlanta every day. And we missed it. So I thought, what are we going to do? I was talking to one of the guys. I said, well, we'll just stay here. We'll stay in the airport. He said, you can't stay in the airport. I said, what do you mean I can't stay in the airport? I had 5 people with me, and they said, you can't stay in the airport. It's too dangerous. I said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? He said, no, there's roving gangs here at night, and you won't last the night. And I thought, okay, that's not a good deal then. Okay, so I said, can you find us something? Can we get a place to stay? And he said, let me see what I can do. And so he came back, said, no, but I'm going to check one thing out. He came back again, he said, okay, I found something. So we get into this van. Nobody in the world knows where we're at. Nobody has any idea of what's going on. We get into this van with people that don't speak any English. We don't know where we're going. And they take us to this motel, and these other guys, other passengers, get out, and they'll walk into the motel. So we start getting down. They said, nope, back in. You know, he didn't speak English, but he had really good sign language. So we got back in the van, and he drove us, and we drove for another half hour. We're in Johannesburg. Johannesburg is the most dangerous city in all the world. And I have 2 girls with me. I have 3 guys with me and myself. And so they takes us to this what he called a motel. And it wasn't really a motel. It was like a shack. And I thought, this is some pretty scary stuff here. So I told the girls, I said, girls, you were all staying in the same room. If I feel for your safety, if I feel that this is going to be unsafe, we're all staying together. But fortunately, I'm not telling you the whole story. I had an accident while I was there, and I had a zipline accident, fell over 25 feet going 20 miles an hour, landed on my back and my head, 3 broken ribs, a severe concussion, and I was not completely with it when I was thinking, because they said, we have card readers in the door, so I thought, if they've got card readers, nobody can get in. And I wasn't thinking that the guy at the front desk was the one that had the card readers. So anyway, so we stayed there that night. I mean, there were gunshots outside. I mean, it was just crazy stuff. And I thought, what if nobody comes and picks us up? Because nobody in the world knows where we're at. We could be really in serious trouble. And, I can understand Daniel to a degree, 14, 15-year-old young man. And he is taken from his home, he's taken from his family, he's taken from everything he knows, and is thrown into this situation. And yet, we know that Daniel, he determined when he was brought before the king that he was not going to eat the king's meat. Can we do the next one? Next slide, please. Thank you. So Daniel had a lot of choices, and he had a lot of tough choices. And so keep on going there. Thank you. One more. There we go. So he was held as a prisoner and captive. So he was isolated from everybody. He was probably with his buddies, but at the same time, they're all together. But Daniel had purpose in his heart to be obedient to the Lord and to do exactly what the Lord wanted him to do. So when he was offered the meat and the provisions of the idols, he said, no, I'm not going to do that. So he negotiated with the guy that was over him, Ashpenaz, and said, if we eat vegetables instead of what you're giving us that's being served to idols, let's see how that goes and see how our countenance looks. So we know that Daniel stepped out in faith and was obedient even to the degree of what he ate. Daniel found favor again with the chief of the eunuchs, and through that relationship, he was able to develop that and to not have to take the king's meat because their countenance looked just as good as the others. Okay, next slide. Can we get the next slide? We're going to go a little bit faster here. Okay. Dan, so again, to finish my story here, we actually, obviously I'm here, we made it. There was a van that came and picked us up. We weren't sure. They picked us up, took us back to the airport, and it was still an ordeal, but we made it, okay? So Daniel faces the stress test. Again, his obedience being tested. His test was emotional. Again, we talked about that, being away from friends and family and everything, and just the emotional stress of that. It was also mental, because he was taught the literature of the Chaldeans. He was being immersed in the culture of the whole Babylonian thought process. And you know what? At that point, he could have said, you know what? I'm just going to go along with the crowd. I'm going to do whatever I need to do just to make this thing work. You know, that would have been the easiest thing. But Daniel didn't. He purposed in his heart to be obedient to the Lord and to do what the Lord wanted him to do. His test was physical. The 4 young men were in top physical condition. You know, if you're going to be before the king, you are going to be the best of the best. So we know that he was in top physical condition as well. And again, this was a spiritual test because he had options here. He had the option to either obey or not to obey, which we know that Daniel did. He did obey and he did follow the Lord in doing what he did. And the very last slide there. And I think that, you know, one of the things that strikes me about Daniel is that he was a man of integrity. You know, even when he was faced with death on several different occasions, especially either praying to the Lord or being thrown into the den of lions, you know, he opted to obey the Lord. And we know that he was totally a man of integrity. Daniel's conviction was to obey God. And I think that so many times in our own lives, the question is, how obedient are we? Are we willing to sacrifice? Are we willing to give? As we've seen several different examples of that. Where are you in your obedience to the Lord?
What does it mean to be wise as a serpent? This was the question a friend asked me as we stood outside a bustling cotton market in Central Asia, a region of the world that sees the violence of Islamic extremism and the relentless pressure of communism collide. I remember I didn't have an adequate answer, so I chose to remain silent. My friend said, "Well, tell me, can the serpent hear God?" Again, inadequacy and fear of getting it wrong rendered me silent. He said the serpent can hear God, but doesn't obey God. My friend paused and with a warm and genuine tone, smiled and said, "Sounds a lot like you, right?" He said the scriptures talk about the sheep and the shepherd. The sheep hear and obey the shepherd's voice, for they are his most valuable possession. The scriptures also talk about the 99 and the 1. My friend said, "Have you ever thought that you might be the one?" Because when I look at people in your country, I see people who claim to know God, but when he asks them to do something, rarely obey. To be honest, I've never thought I'm the one. But for the first time in my Christian walk, I realized I am the one. I'm a sheep, treasured and valued by the shepherd. I hear his voice, but unless what I'm asked is safe, comfortable and guaranteed to work, I rarely obey. Looking back, I realize that in those moments of obedience, I often mask my evangelism with kindness and generosity, but without mentioning Jesus. It's as though in those moments, I sell Jesus out for the hope of receiving a yes, or to protect from the fear and embarrassment of a no. My friend in Central Asia tells me there may be nothing more cruel than to leave Jesus out of our language, because in those moments, all we're doing is paving the wide road to hell with generosity and good deeds. Whereas the people I meet in Central Asia tell me that despite what their obedience will likely cost them, that the simplicity of the gospel is to be able to articulate who Jesus is and what he has done in your life. That their greatest reward is to one day see him face to face, and that Jesus is the most serious thing in their life. They tell me that in the moments of obedience, they've become used to water being their pavement. Can you imagine being so used to stepping out of the boat that the water felt like solid ground? You see, unless there is a Jesus distinctive to our language, then I fear that we are no better than the serpent, who hears the voice of God but doesn't obey. We shouldn't be trying to avoid persecution. We should be running towards it with courageous obedience, knowing that wherever the gospel is being shared, persecution exists. The 99 and the 1. The question is, which one are you?
Let's pray. Father, again, thank you for this time together. I thank you for your word. Father, I just pray that we'd evaluate our own lives and see where we are, how obedient we are to your calling and your will. Again, we thank you for this time. In Christ's name, amen.